My name is Linda Hartwell, and I have been a nurse for 17 years. I have seen things that would make most people lose sleep for weeks, but nothing prepared me for what happened on that humid September afternoon at Riverside Memorial Hospital. The emergency department was chaotic as always, with patients filling every available space. I was triaging a line of people when the automatic doors opened, and he walked in. Captain James Mitchell, a decorated Marine officer, stood at 6 feet 2 inches tall, with a posture that screamed military discipline. But something was wrong. His skin had a grayish pallor that immediately caught my attention, and despite his attempts to stand straight, I noticed the slight tremor in his hands. He approached the desk and said he had been feeling unwell for 3 days, experiencing chest tightness and unusual fatigue. My instincts kicked in immediately. I have learned to trust that voice inside my head, the one that whispers warnings when others see nothing alarming. I quickly took his vitals: blood pressure, 190/110, heart rate, 115 beats per minute, respiratory rate, 22 breaths per minute. These numbers told a story that terrified me. If this story has hooked you so far, subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. I immediately flagged Captain Mitchell's case as urgent and called for Dr. Harrison, the attending physician on duty. Dr. Alan Harrison had been working at Riverside Memorial for 12 years, and he had developed a reputation for being thorough, but also incredibly dismissive of nursing assessments. When he arrived, I explained the captain's symptoms and vitals, emphasizing my concern about a possible cardiac event. Dr. Harrison glanced at the chart, then at the captain, who was still standing and appearing relatively composed, despite his obvious discomfort. "He looks fine to me, Linda," Dr. Harrison said with that tone I had heard too many times before. "Probably just stress and dehydration. Get him some fluids and run basic blood work. We will monitor him for a couple of hours." I felt my stomach tighten. "Doctor, his blood pressure is dangerously high, and combined with the chest pain and his risk factors, I really think we should consider this more seriously. Maybe an EKG at minimum?" He looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "I appreciate your concern, but I went to medical school for 8 years. I know how to assess a patient. Just follow my orders, please." The words stung, but what hurt more was knowing that I might be right and being powerless to change the course of action. "Thank you for staying with me this far. This shows you feel the same way I felt when I lived all of this. So subscribe and hit the bell, because what comes now changes everything." Captain Mitchell was moved to a monitoring bed in the observation unit. I stayed close, checking on him every 15 minutes, even though I had other patients demanding my attention. Something about his condition gnawed at me relentlessly. At around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed his breathing becoming more labored. When I checked his vitals again, his blood pressure had climbed to 200/120, and he was now sweating profusely despite the air-conditioned room. I documented everything meticulously and went to find Dr. Harrison again. He was in the break room, having coffee and chatting with 2 other physicians. "Dr. Harrison, Captain Mitchell's condition is deteriorating. His blood pressure is continuing to rise, and he is showing signs of respiratory distress." He sighed heavily, as if I were interrupting something far more important. "Linda, you are being overly anxious. We have him on monitors. If something serious happens, the alarms will alert us. Please stop catastrophizing every case." I stood there, frozen by frustration and disbelief. Around me, I could see the other nurses exchanging knowing glances. This was not the first time one of us had been dismissed this way, but this felt different. This felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion and being tied to the tracks, unable to move. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it down in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. To understand why I was so adamant about Captain Mitchell's condition, I need to take you back 7 years. I was working at a different hospital when my father was admitted with what everyone, including the doctors, thought was simple indigestion and stress. My father was a proud man, a retired firefighter who rarely complained about anything, but I saw the signs. I begged the medical team to take his symptoms more seriously, to run more tests, to consider the possibility of a heart attack. They patted me on the shoulder and told me I was too emotionally involved, that I needed to trust their professional judgment. 6 hours later, my father died of a massive myocardial infarction that could have been prevented if they had acted sooner. That day broke something inside me, but it also forged something stronger. I made a promise to myself that I would never let fear of confrontation or hierarchy stop me from advocating for a patient. I learned everything I could about cardiac emergencies, took advanced certifications, and became known among my colleagues as someone who could spot a crisis before it fully developed. But expertise means nothing when no one listens. As I walked back to check on Captain Mitchell that afternoon, I felt that familiar dread creeping up my spine, the same feeling I had experienced with my father. History was repeating itself, and I was being forced to watch it happen again. By 6 in the evening, Captain Mitchell's condition had visibly worsened. His face was now drenched in sweat, his breathing shallow and rapid. When I approached his bed, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Something is very wrong," he whispered. "I have been in combat zones. I know what it feels like when your body is shutting down. Please, you have to help me." His words cut through me like a knife. I immediately called for Dr. Harrison again, and this time I also paged the cardiology resident. When they arrived, I presented the complete picture: progressively worsening vitals, increasing chest pain, new onset of nausea, and now severe anxiety. The cardiology resident, Dr. Patel, immediately suggested an emergency EKG and cardiac enzyme tests, but Dr. Harrison overruled him. "We are not going to panic over some elevated blood pressure and anxiety. Captain, you are a military man. You have dealt with stress before. We will give you something to help you relax and bring that blood pressure down." I could not believe what I was hearing. I looked at Dr. Patel, who seemed torn between supporting his colleague and following his own clinical instincts. The hospital hierarchy was suffocating, the invisible chain that kept everyone in their designated roles. But I was done playing by those rules. I stepped forward and said something I never thought I would say. "Dr. Harrison, with all due respect, if you do not order comprehensive cardiac testing right now, I will go over your head to the chief of medicine." The room fell silent. Dr. Harrison's face turned red with anger. "Nurse Hartwell, you are way out of line. You do not have the authority to make medical decisions or threaten physicians. I could have you written up for insubordination." I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then write me up. But I will not stand here and watch this patient die because of ego and protocol. I have seen this before, and I will not let it happen again." The tension was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Other nurses had gathered near the doorway, watching this unprecedented confrontation. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Dr. Harrison, perhaps it would not hurt to run the tests. If Nurse Hartwell is wrong, we have lost nothing but 30 minutes. If she is right..." He left the sentence hanging in the air. For a moment, I thought Dr. Harrison might explode, but then Captain Mitchell groaned loudly, clutching his chest with both hands. His monitor began alarming, showing dangerous arrhythmia. In that instant, everything changed. Dr. Harrison's face went from angry to alarmed. "Get a crash cart, now!" he shouted, but it was too late for prevention. Now we were in damage control mode, exactly what I had been trying to avoid for the past 4 hours. I ran to get the emergency equipment, my hands shaking with adrenaline and vindication. I had been right, but being right did not feel like victory. It felt like failure. Captain Mitchell collapsed as I was returning with the crash cart. He fell forward out of the bed, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Medical staff swarmed around him immediately. Dr. Harrison began barking orders while Dr. Patel started chest compressions. I dropped to my knees beside the captain, helping to position him properly. In that chaotic moment, as we fought to save his life, something extraordinary happened. Captain Mitchell's eyes fluttered open for just a second. Through the oxygen mask we had placed on his face, through the pain and fear, he looked directly at me. His lips moved, and I leaned closer to hear. "You," he whispered. "I need you. Stay." Then his eyes closed again. Those words hit me harder than any reprimand or dismissal ever could. In his most vulnerable moment, surrounded by doctors and advanced medical equipment, this strong military officer was asking for me, not because of my credentials or my title, but because I had been the only one who truly saw him, who believed him, who fought for him. Dr. Patel called out, "We have a pulse. Sinus rhythm returning." The crash team continued working, but now with renewed hope. As they stabilized him enough to transfer to the intensive care unit, I stayed by his side, holding his hand. I whispered, "I am here. I am not going anywhere." In that moment, I realized that nursing is not just about following protocols or executing orders. It is about bearing witness to human suffering and having the courage to act when everyone else looks away. The next hour was a blur of emergency procedures. Captain Mitchell was rushed to the catheterization lab where they discovered what I had suspected all along, a 95% blockage in his left anterior descending artery, commonly called the Widowmaker. He was literally minutes away from a massive heart attack that would have likely killed him. The interventional cardiologist inserted a stent, and slowly, the captain's condition began to stabilize. While he was in surgery, I sat in the nurse's station, completing the incident report. My hands were still shaking. Dr. Harrison approached me, and I braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. But instead of anger, his face showed something I had never seen before: humility. "Nurse Hartwell," he began, his voice quiet, "you saved that man's life. If you had not pushed me, if you had not stood your ground, Captain Mitchell would be dead right now. I let my ego cloud my judgment, and that is inexcusable. I looked up at him, exhausted and emotionally drained. Dr. Harrison, I do not need an apology for me. I need you to promise that the next time a nurse brings you a concern, you will listen. We are all on the same team. We all went into healthcare to save lives, not to protect hierarchies. He nodded slowly. You have my word, and I will be speaking to hospital administration about revising our protocols for patient advocacy. What happened today should never happen again. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was a start. 3 days later, Captain Mitchell was stable and recovering in the cardiac care unit. I was assigned to his case, and during one of my evening rounds, he finally told me his story. I knew something was wrong for over a week, he admitted, but in the Marines, you are taught to push through pain, to never show weakness. When I finally came to the hospital, I expected doctors to take charge and fix me, but you were different. You looked at me like I was a person, not just a case number or a diagnosis. He paused, taking a sip of water. My grandmother was a nurse in World War II. She used to tell me stories about how nurses were the real heroes, the ones who noticed the details that saved lives. I never fully understood what she meant until that day when I was lying there, feeling myself slipping away, and you were the only one who saw me. We talked for nearly an hour that evening. I learned that he was divorced, had 2 teenage daughters, and had been planning to retire from active duty in 6 months. This health scare had made him reevaluate everything. As our conversation deepened, something unexpected began to develop between us. It was not romantic, at least not yet, but there was a connection forged in the crucible of crisis, a mutual respect and understanding that felt rare and precious. When I finally left his room that night, he called out, "Linda?" I turned back. "Thank you for fighting for me when I could not fight for myself." The aftermath of that September afternoon rippled through Riverside Memorial Hospital in ways I never anticipated. Within 2 weeks, the hospital administration implemented a new protocol. Any nurse could trigger a rapid response team consultation if they believed a patient was in critical danger, regardless of the attending physician's assessment. It was called the Hartwell Protocol, and while the recognition was flattering, what mattered most was knowing that other nurses would have the support I had to fight for. Captain Mitchell recovered fully and did retire from the Marines as planned, but our story did not end at his discharge. We stayed in contact, first through occasional messages, then regular phone calls. 6 months later, he asked me to dinner. Now, 2 years after that terrifying day, James and I are engaged. People often ask me if I ever regret confronting Dr. Harrison, if I ever worry about what might have happened to my career. The truth is, I do not regret it for a second. That day taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. It taught me that sometimes breaking the rules is the most ethical thing you can do, and it taught me that real healthcare happens when we put patients above protocols, compassion above hierarchy, and truth above comfort. What do you think about this story? Would you have had the courage to stand up like that? Write your opinion in the comments. I would love to know what you think about stories like this, where professionals have to fight to be heard. If you enjoyed this journey with me, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next incredible stories about the real lives of nurses and healthcare professionals. And if you stayed with me until this final moment, write the word advocate to prove you heard the whole story and to show that you believe in the importance of defending those who need it most.